All right, the Orlando Magic are the latest professional sports team, I believe they're the latest, to join the growing trend of eliminating their all-female dance teams and replacing them with sort of these co-ed teams that include women and men. I think this is a good progressive move, but there are some people who disagree with me. In fact, there are a lot of people who disagree with me, as I found out yesterday when I posted a blog saying, essentially that provocatively dressed all-female dance teams dancing for the enjoyment for men seems a bit sexist to me. But again, a lot of people disagree with that blog post. One of those is our next guest. Let's welcome in former Seattle Seahawks cheerleader, Makiba Pate, who is the co-host of the Pro Cheerleading podcast, The Truth Behind the Palms, which is available on Apple, Google, Spotify, all the podcast websites. You can also find their website at procheerleadingpodcast.transistor.fm. Makiba, thanks for joining us this morning. How are you? Thanks for getting up early for us.
Oh, yeah, I hear the birds chirping, but I appreciate you inviting me on. Thanks so much.
Okay, you have authored, and I read it yesterday, an open letter to NBA teams on behalf of pro dancers, essentially protesting the elimination of female dance teams. Tell us why.
It's very simple. These decisions have come down without any input from the women that it's impacted. It's had a very disproportionately and negative impact on women. They've danced and, prepped their whole lives to have these jobs, and they've been ambassadors of the community for several years. And the rationale that they're giving to move in this gender-inclusive, family-friendly, hip-hop crew co-ed teams is just misplaced. And the main issue that we are taking is just the lack of transparency and the restrictions that it's placed on women to find other opportunities in pro cheer and dance. So there's a lot wrong with it. We can dive in as deep as you want to go.
Do you? I'm curious now. A lot of teams are doing this under the guise of, hey, we're trying to be, more inclusive, more enlightened, more progressive, whatever you want to call it. Do you think there's another real reason why they're doing this?
I do. We've been covering this since, October when we first started the podcast, and I think you tried to tie it into the Me Too movement in your article, but there's been a lot of women that have come forward maybe as a result of Me Too, which is really just women coming forward and speaking out about being sexually assaulted and harassed. And so between the NFL and NBA, there were several women that either spoke to the press, sued the teams, and tried to raise issues that we experience as pro dancers and pro cheerleaders. And I think as a result of that, maybe from a liability perspective, teams have decided, like the San Antonio Spurs, that started this whole trend, that it's easier to get rid of the dancers than it is to fix the actual problem. And trying to put a feel-good spin on it is saying that it's gender inclusive, and now all of a sudden family-friendly is just insulting.
Now you say it's a growing trend. How many teams now are moving in this direction?
If you count San Antonio Spurs at the start of the NBA season, we're now at 6. Just yesterday, the Philadelphia Sixers announced that they were also doing a hip-hop co-ed dance team. So that would be the Spurs, the Sacramento Kings, the Dallas Mavs, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Orlando Magic, and now the Sixers.
What about in the NFL?
In the NFL, it hit really close to home because the Seattle Seahawks have also moved into a co-ed hip-hop dance team. So the Seagulls, which is a dance group that I was a part of, it was all female. Essentially, they've just eliminated that team. I mean, it's the same blurb, I'm sure you maybe have seen it, where the teams are putting out these statements that they're building on the 40-plus, 30-plus year tradition of these all-female dance teams, but in actuality, they're eliminating it. There's no more Seagulls. It's now a co-ed team. Luckily, they didn't fire their dancers. They had a separate audition after they held the initial one for the women and added on 8 men and I believe 2 women to their team. But the whole program, as I knew it, is now changed and over, and so it'll be interesting to see what they do this year, but I'm not necessarily a fan of the rationale behind the decisions and how they were made.
Talking to Makiba Pate, former Seattle Seahawks cheerleader for 5 years, also the co-host of Pro Cheerleading podcast, The Truth Behind the Palms. Are there cheerleaders slash dancers in professional sports that this is their main occupation?
Not at all, because the pay doesn't sustain any livelihood whatsoever.
Okay.
These women have, full-time careers, jobs, multiple part-time jobs that they may piece together. But unfortunately, they're not able to sustain a living just off of what we're paid as pro cheerleaders or dancers.
So it's essentially a passion and a hobby.
A passion and I would say a hobby to a certain extent. But, that just makes some of the statements that you made in your blog post just so problematic.
Mm-hmm.
Why would a woman, devote so much time and hours in practicing and being out there in the community as an ambassador, all for male attention? Like, we can get male attention just walking down the street. It's definitely a passion, and they're serving as role models to other young women and girls. I'm sure you know. I saw that you have 2 girls. I'm not sure if they're interested in dance, but people have, tons of young women and girls that are in dance programs, cheerleading programs, and ultimately, if you move up and improve in your craft, this is the ultimate level that you would reach as a professional. You're either dancing in a company, with some other form of dance, or you're a professional dancer or cheerleader. So this is our industry, and it's under attack, if you ask me.
So you don't find it, and again, I got hammered on this yesterday, but I'll ask you. You don't find it at least a little bit sexist for teams to have beautiful dancing girls out there in often provocative attire and sometimes dancing suggestively out there? You don't think that's just a little bit sexist?
What I think is sexist is not having these women at the table to at least ask the question, how do you feel dancing for this team? How do you feel wearing the uniform? Do you feel that you're being objectified? What changes would you like to make to the program so that you feel more comfortable? These conversations aren't happening. I think it's sexist for these decisions to be made for these women without ever asking them their input. And I think it's really in the eyes of the viewers. Mm-hmm. If what people see when women perform is gyrating and shimmying and shaking, then there's something that speaks more to their mindset, I think, than it does the women and what they're doing out there on this court. Because what I see lines, I see formations, I see transitions, I see power, I see athleticism, I see beautiful women, and I see sexiness, and there's nothing wrong with that. That should never be vilified like there's something that should be, shamed. I just don't believe that. And I think if anybody would objectively look at what these women do and understand the technique and training that's involved in order to perform at that level, then they would be able to appreciate that just like they would any other performance. You have backup dancers for every popular musical artist. Nobody's critiquing and attacking the same dance moves that they might be doing. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the performances of pro dancers, especially in the NBA.
What's the matter with having co-ed dancers?
I'm not necessarily opposed to a co-ed team. I think it's rather limiting to have it only feature one genre of dance. So it's going to get really old fast to have only hip-hop performances for 41 home games in the NBA. I think what we've seen in the NFL is just, a really cool thing with having male cheerleaders added to the teams for the Rams and the Saints, and now there's up to, I believe, 6 teams in the NFL that have men this year. So it's not so much that I have an issue with it being co-ed. I think that, again, the rationale behind it and this, guise of being gender inclusive, when you're not really including the women at the table and making these decisions, that's what I have an issue with. At the end of the day, go ahead.
Again, are the teams, when they're making these decisions with co-ed dance teams, are they including the former dancers that were on the all-female dance team? You know what I'm saying? Like, will the Magic dancers be included in the co-ed dance team?
From what we've understood, number one, these decisions were made probably long before they were announced to the women. They either found out the day before on accident or just poorly timed, right? And I do want to speak to that because the contracts that they're under have certain restrictions about their ability to audition for other teams while they are a member of that dance team. So it really unfairly impairs them from getting other employment, doing other auditions, perhaps moving to audition for another team. So I don't think that they have been included at the table at all, and they can audition. What we heard is that it's been mentioned because their contract's in that yes, you can audition, but it's not necessarily that they feel welcome to. Essentially, they've been fired. So you can come back and apply, similar to an organization that goes through a reorg or lets people go. I mean, you can apply for the open positions for the same department, or you can decide that you need to move on. And so I think they're open to audition, but again, the way that these women have been treated, why would they even want to represent an organization like that?
What would it typically, and I know it probably differs, varying on which team or where you live, what does a dancer slash cheerleader make?
It does depend upon the locale. I think very close to minimum wage, if you will. And that's probably a very generic way of answering that. But it's definitely not a wage that you can sustain yourself.
Now, you were a cheerleader for 5 years. The New York Times did the story last year, big expose on all of the sexual harassment out there, the story of the Washington Redskins cheerleaders. Is there a lot of that goes on?
I think that there has been issues in the NFL, probably in the NBA as well. That was confirmed by the Yahoo article that interviewed several women in the NBA. I think there have been issues with the way that women were treated, with the way these programs were run. And it's unfortunate that the solution hasn't been centered on fixing that issue rather than kind of punishing the women. We saw with the Buffalo Bills, when they raised issues of pay equity, what did they choose to do? Disband their cheerleaders. So that's not the answer, to get rid of the programs altogether. It's to take a deep look into how you run your organization, how these women are treated, what they're paid, having conversations with these women so you understand from their perspective what needs to be changed. And that, unfortunately, for all of these organizations that may have been implicated in these articles or sued by former dancers, this is an easy way out to just eliminate the teams altogether.
Makiba, last one. How has your open letter been received by the leagues?
So far, we're still waiting for a response. I think it's really easy to ignore the noise. I see the women that follow our podcast have been kind of uniting and speaking together and supporting one another, but I won't rest until Adam Silver has his eyes on this letter and gives the women the respect that they deserve. I think it's a very important issue. It has ripple effects. It's absolutely unacceptable for them to make these decisions in this manner.
How can people get involved with your cause?
I think what we're hoping to do is just draw attention to it. I would love to continue the dialogue with other media networks, because I think unless these women are able to share in their own voices why they love what they do, it's not so much to just complain. Everybody complains about their job, right, in hopes of making it better. But these women love what they do. They have been very devoted, and again, this is an industry where you prepare your whole life to reach at this level. And so I just think supporting these women as their voices get out and really drawing shame upon the organizations for handling it this way, it really did not have to be done in this manner. These women deserve more respect than that. So I think helping us get the attention of the leadership of the NBA, because obviously all these teams are drinking from the same fountain here, and it really needs to come up from the top that these types of decisions are no longer acceptable.
Makiba Pate, how can people get your podcast?
Tune in on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We're in our 3rd season now, and we've discussed a lot of these issues in our first couple of seasons. Encourage everybody to take a listen, and you'll understand the life of a pro cheerleader, all of the issues, and get a better respect and understanding of what these women do.
Makiba Pate, former Seattle Seahawks cheerleader. We appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much. Very enlightening.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.